Well, I guess we'll
Hello.
get started. I'm going to introduce you, Dr. Kutzik. I'm Dr. Maureen Schmitter-Edgecombe. I'm in the Department of Psychology, and my colleague, Dr. Cook, is in the School of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science. And we're very pleased to have you here today. This is our Gerent Technology class. This is the second semester of the class. Dr. Kutzik is a professor of sociology. He's at Drexel University. He holds a number of patents. He's well published. He's had a number of grants. And I'm especially interested in having him come talk after reading that chapter that I had you guys read. I think he offers a perspective that maybe we haven't completely thought through in a lot of the things that we've been talking about in terms of actually if you're developing these technologies, moving them into the marketplace. And I especially loved his term, disruptive technologies, because there were some things that I hadn't really thought about the entire system and what kind of happens when you're taking a technology and actually using it out there in the real world. So we've been spending a lot of time talking about how to develop technology so that it's going to be suitable for the older generation, working with the older adults, thinking about things that might affect their usability. And this semester, we're going to get a little bit more into the entire system, the caregivers, the other users of that technology. And I think this is going to be a perfect segue to hear a little bit about his experiences, and then you guys will have a chance to ask questions. So without further ado, we are excited to have you speak with us today.
Great. Looking forward to it. So can you all hear me okay?
Yeah, yes.
Can you? Okay, good. Okay, there's a little delay. So here's how I'll proceed. I'm going to show you a very short PowerPoint presentation, only about 8 or 9 slides, along with a very, very short video that's only about 2 minutes. And then I'm going to open it up for discussion. And I'm going to assume that you've had a chance to read through the chapter that was assigned. And what I will do is kind of give you the opportunity to ask questions about the chapter, but also ask you questions kind of that are behind the chapter, behind the different parts. So I'm going to now put on a little PowerPoint. It'll take about between 8 and 11 minutes, and we'll go with that. Okay, so title you can read as well as I can, Behavioral Informatics and Telecare. 1 second. Here's the beginning. All right, that's a little better. So this is the title of the article. And it kind of goes back to a big idea, an inventive aha moment of 2 gerontologists, myself a sociologist, my then colleague Anthony Glasscock, an anthropologist, when we decided to try to build a tool to help our own caregiving for our own parents. At the time, his mother was hard of hearing and experiencing trouble following her medication regimen, and he asked me if it might be possible to figure out a way to find out if she's taking her pills by calling it up on the computer. My father at the time was very sick with a disease called multiple myeloma that made it difficult and dangerous for him to get in and out of bed. He was living in a different city, and I just needed to know whether he got up and around. And to make a long story short, this developed into a very long-going research program, 19 years actually, what we call the Everyday Living Monitoring System, or ELMS. And I've been involved from the journey, in a sense, from the proof of concept, the very beginning of the inventive steps, all the way through to commercialization and its eventual acquisition by GE and Intel in 2009 for their Carovations project. I guess there's a fair amount of business success, in a sense, and a fair amount of academic success. But really, the bottom line in this was to try to enhance, with appropriate technology, high-touch kind of caregiving efforts. Basically, we're creatures of habit. If you think about it, every day you get up, you brush your teeth, I make coffee, I go around my house, pretty much on autopilot. And the idea of using non-obtrusive sensors to pick up these patterns and to look for possible changes in them is actually made real and realizable because we basically carry out our activities of daily living pretty much the same way every day. Pattern recognition software, which we had to kind of develop from the beginning. I should point out this project began in 1993, long before there was an internet, was really made possible by the fact that opening and closing the refrigerator, going in and out of the bathroom, these kinds of things are trackable by very simple sensor systems. This information collected by the sensor system could be translated into actionable information to help caregivers, both formal and informal. And it's this information that can actually help you provide the right amount of care, the right type of care by the right person at the right time. That really was the inspiration for us to try to develop this monitoring system. The article, or rather chapter, that you've read discusses 3 different kinds of behavioral remote person monitoring systems that are actually used and commercialized and out there in the world. The first is a residential, or I would call it a hardwired system, which is a system of sensors and software that's built into a brick and mortar building that can actually begin to look at and examine non-obtrusively the activity of the different people that are in that building. And Oakfield Estates, in the discussion of that, really talks about that. The upside of this is that it enhances care. The downside of such a system is that it's generally not replicable or movable from one place to another, and is extremely expensive to put in place and to maintain. The second type of system that's discussed, and it's one that I'm most familiar with, is what I call rule-based home environment monitoring systems, such as Quiet Care. And these are very, what you would call thin client, simple systems. All of the hardware to put it into a house, not for the house, is probably in the range of about $130, $120. It collects information from motion detectors and sometimes read switches, and converts this into actionable information on web pages that can be used by caregivers to understand better what's going on with the people they're taking care of. It's been tried and tested in my own work in 3 different countries, in more than 20 different settings of different kinds of care delivery organizations, and was actually adopted, as we'll see, in the Netherlands and in places in the UK as a reimbursable form of care delivery. So we can talk about Quiet Care if you're interested. And then finally, towards the end of the chapter, discussion of GPS-based wearable mobile devices and how they plug by mesh network into various kinds of scalable, interoperable sensors that are all around us. Let me show you the most powerful data collection system that we have is a cell phone. This is got all the advantages of being somewhere between Santa Claus and Big Brother, in the sense that Santa Claus and Big Brother both know when you're awake, when you're sleeping, who you're talking to, what you're doing. The fact is, a combination of this, of Fitbit and smart scales and smart appliances, will allow for the collection of lots of information, which, using proper analytics, can really begin to give you a good sense of what's going on with somebody that's receiving care. Let me stop for a second and just make sure that you are able to understand my presentation. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, very well.
Okay, I don't want to go too fast or too slow or what have you. Okay, so what I'd like to do next is to take a little quick look at what Quiet Care is. Right here you see on screen a picture, and on the left side of that picture is actually a sense of what the Quiet Care instrumentation looks like. Those kind of cylindrical things are only 6-inch high motion detectors that wirelessly send a signal to that little base station that actually plugs into a phone line. This application was developed before the widespread use of Wi-Fi and other kinds of hubs to the internet by the elderly. And then on the right side, you see red, yellow, and green indicators. This is a Christmas tree display. Red means something may have happened, check in immediately. Yellow means something may be going on, such as in the meal column. Person might be not eating as much as they usually do. Check in on that, discuss that with the client. And green means no apparent change from the usual ongoing continuous baseline performance of these different kinds of activities. These different kinds of activities are what I call everyday living activities. They are not exactly the same as activities of daily living, but they're kind of close and they seem to be very effective. And as you can see, this is part of a screenshot from some years ago from a test in the Netherlands, because it says Netherlands Quiet Care. So what I'm going to do now is just navigate for a second to a little movie and to share screen in a different way with you. And this movie we're about to see is actually a blurb from General Electric and Intel's Care Ovation. And they're the group that has acquired the Quiet Care technology. And it tells you a little bit about it and how it works. So it goes for about 2.5 minutes. So we'll switch to that.
Let's take a look at Quiet Care in action. Quiet Care technicians install wireless sensors in residents' living quarters in under 30 minutes. Residents continue to go about their normal routine with their privacy intact. Meanwhile, Quiet Care sensors relay activity data to a server around the clock. This software starts to learn the normal activity patterns of residents. This learning makes it easier to spot changes in daily routine, which could indicate something clinically significant, such as a urinary tract infection. Quiet Care automatically generates an alert and notifies staff so they can respond promptly. Alerts can help enable quick intervention in the case of wandering and elopements, delayed wake-up times, or bathroom risks. With Quiet Care, staff can monitor resident activity anywhere, anytime, from a pager, a computer, or a mobile device with an internet connection. The reports generated by Quiet Care make it easier for staff to recognize or identify changes in activity patterns, such as frequent bathroom visits or night motion. Empowered with the information that Quiet Care provides, staff can proactively intervene to safeguard residents, helping to reduce the risk of hospitalizations with a profound impact on the health of residents.
Okay, and I'll just switch back. Stop share. Okay, and back to the slideshow for just a moment. Okay, I'm back here. Good. So that's a little blurb on Quiet Care, and it's geared towards the assisted living residential facility marketplace, which is one of the areas that it's been used. The effectiveness of Quiet Care has been interestingly studied and documented. I personally been involved in getting people off the floor after having a heart attack, finding out that they've fallen, urinary tract infections, flu. A lot of the work I've done was actually with people with very complex medication regimens that were suffering from a combination of HIV and AIDS, as well as behavioral problems. And Quiet Care was very, very effective at understanding if they're going about their daily activities in a way that's healthy or not healthy for a visiting nurse setting. In particular, we've seen improved communication between caregivers and the person being taken care of, improved adherence with health behaviors such as medication. Very important has been the production of electronic records and tracking different changes over time, which has really given a kind of historical perspective to problems that begin to occur small and then grow into larger and larger issues. The idea is to prevent a small problem from accelerating into a major problem over time. Both the professional and informal caregivers would frequently refer to a peace of mind factor, that the fact that they feel they're more on top and of their caregiving activity, and that they are able to better carry out their work. And finally, as I say, it was adopted by the Dutch National Care System for Limburg province, which is kind of in the southeast of the Netherlands, as well as by about a dozen British councils, which are kind of local area governments that are responsible for social and medical care. So it's been somewhat successful in terms of implementation and adoption. However, it hasn't been widely adopted. And this really brings me to the heart of what I see as the matter with this kind of technology. If it's such a good idea, then why hasn't it been widely adopted? And in order to understand that problem, we actually held 3 different conference sessions in Europe and in the United States of groups and individual researchers involved in the implementation of the quiet care system to try to look for what the barriers are. And these are actually laid out on pages 300 and 302 of the chapter. But let me just kind of give you a very quick summary of what I think is important. The key is implementation. It's not plug and play. Installing systems and trying them out, having small studies or demonstrations where you kick the tires and you say, yeah, this is kind of nice. This doesn't really lead anywhere. It might lead to some academic articles and some interesting limited engineering solutions. But to get an organization to really change the way they do their business and to change their protocols of how they go about working with their clients, that's an extremely disruptive technology. So I would say that where it can be successful is where an organization such as Proteon in the Netherlands decides, yes, they're going to do it, and creates a total top-down structure where people are made to do this new kind of work in a new way by actually creating a new division. The bottom line is the bottom line is the bottom line in terms of the money issue. And this is the other thing that I've really discovered. The question of who pays is the all-important question and really has to be, unfortunately, solved before you start changing the nature of an organization and implementing a technological solution such as this. If it's not clear that the service provider, for example, has a steady stream of income that is going to pay for the system, it probably is not going to be a sustainable system within that organization. And it's not just the service providers that have to be paid, but also the tech providers, those that manufacture the equipment, those that actually carry out the monitoring system and take care of the software. In the case of England and the Netherlands, there was also always, even in the United States as well, a dispatch service that would receive this information and begin to parse it out, such as to receive a red alert that somebody may have fallen in their bathroom so that there can be a quick response. In the Netherlands, it was actually the regional ambulance system that would receive this red alert, and they would have to go out and help the person. All of these things cost money, and money becomes, from the beginning, a real big problem. Just to stay on that screen a little bit more, just to give you a sense of my frustration with it, the Netherlands decided to actually pay for this as a reimbursable service on the governmental level. This is, in a sense, a home run. On the other hand, General Electric, which is actually responsible for supplying the equipment and maintaining the technology, decided they're not interested at this point in time of making a company, GE subsidiary in the Netherlands, in order to carry out a quiet care full implementation, to move it from, let's say, several hundred people to tens of thousands of people. Why did GE decide not to do this? Very simply, they're not going to make that much money at it compared to how much money they would make selling more and more imaging equipment for hospitals. So the issue of who pays becomes really critical from the beginning, and it's almost never talked about. The future. So I'll end here with a quick look at the future. The first thing I want to say is in terms of behavioral informatics, since the 1990s, there's been an explosion, an astronomical increase in the amount of behavioral information that is automatically, routinely, and unobtrusively collected on individuals by electronic devices. They're everywhere, literally everywhere. And now the last 2 years have seen wearable sensors such as Fitbits and mesh networks that can talk to smart scales and medication dispensers that allow you, usually with just a connection to a cell phone, to post all kinds of data that's objectively derived and very clean to a web-based analytical website so that you can do all kinds of interesting monitoring. Smart house and smart appliances are also on the rise. The Nest, for example, the Nest thermometer actually looks at behavioral patterns to try to figure out when to heat and when not to heat particular rooms in a house. We're evolving quickly towards an Internet of Things and that notion of everywhere that's discussed in the article. So given this, it may be possible, just may be possible for something in terms of caregiving to quote unquote skip over certain roadblocks and challenges on the technology side. I'm not 100% optimistic about it, but I recognize the possibility that since there are so many inexpensive devices out there and so much inexpensive developer toolkits for making software to integrate these devices, it may be quite cheap rather than expensive to cobble together the kind of monitoring system you would need to do what QuietCare and some of these other products do, without actually having a single company that is going to make this their thing. And I point to Best Buy in Minneapolis, Minnesota, as being a case example where they're actually trying to take things that they sell and to make bespoke, customizable monitoring systems for caregivers right there in their store. And it's notable that it is in Minneapolis because this is where the Honeywell labs are that I've consulted for on some of their monitoring products, as well as another group called Red Wings Technology. So might it just be that people buy little pieces of such a monitoring system and put it together themselves? It's a theoretical possibility, and we're closer to it than we've been in the past. But my real sense is that you would need to see a rise of some kind of electronic record, a care record, if you will, analogous and homologous to the electronic record in the healthcare system for behavioral monitoring as a form of telehome care to really catch on. In healthcare delivery, you have to have an electronic record of what was done for the patient and all of the information about that in order to get paid. You can't be reimbursed without everything being lined up within that proof of and documentation of care provision in the record, diagnosis, as well as money transfer. The same thing is true in behavioral mental health in the United States right now. Without actually presenting an electronic record of what has been given to the client, you can't get reimbursed. So electronic records and monitoring of different kinds has become institutionalized in certain parts of our healthcare setting precisely because you cannot get the bill paid without showing that you've actually used it. My thought is if some of this monitoring activity and electronic records that come out of it became necessary for actually bringing money into an organization, you would see a very fast shift in the direction of widespread adoption. But other than that, I really think it's going to be kind of a slow go over the next decade or so, and I'm interested to see where it winds up. So let me conclude my presentation with that and open it up to discussion and just go from there. So I am back to the discussion.
Thank you so much for that talk, and I'll let the students start first. I think that Anna and I have a few questions, but I'll let you guys get started. Yeah.
Okay. I had a question about Quiet Care, where you have the red, yellow, and green to have alerts like for bathroom falls. I was wondering, you know, the life alert buttons that they advertise, like help, I've fallen and I need help or something. How like analogous is it to that, where the sensor picks it up immediately and lets someone know versus someone pushing the button? Like, is it just as quick, or?
Okay, one of the holy grails of personal monitoring with different technologies is a full monitor. None of them work very well. Okay, probably the most widespread one is put out by Tunstall in the United Kingdom. And frankly, if a person falls down like boom, okay, it'll probably catch that fall. But if a person kind of slumps down slowly and swoons against a wall, it's not going to work. So that column is really listed potential bathroom fall, and it's essentially we see a person go into the bathroom and not come out for 2 hours. And we have found people in the bathroom passed out for various reasons. Medical reasons all the way over to a guy shot up heroin and couldn't get off the toilet. Okay, I mean, it's a whole range of reasons. So it's an imperfect system, but what it does is it basically looks to see if the person went into the bathroom and did not come out, and at times basically 2 hours, and then sends out a possible red alert. Then once that happens, the caregiving protocol switches in. Usually you call the person up. You get a neighbor or child to try to knock on the door. If that doesn't work, you basically send out fire and rescue. And we've had several people, frankly, saved that way. And we've had at least 2 people basically very irate because their front door was smashed down by the New York Fire Department. So, and that's real, you know, that didn't go well. But with something like this, it's always a matter of false alarms. The more sensitive you make it, the more likely you are to get a false alarm. And it's very difficult to balance out. Second point, fall detection is a very imperfect science. This is not a particularly good use of Quiet Care, but it's one that the commercializers really wanted to be able to claim. And unlike the personal emergency response buttons, you don't have to wear it and you don't have to press it. And the problem with PERS is that a lot of people simply will not use it. And there's one case I know very well from my own work in Philadelphia here of a woman who would repeatedly fall. We'd see her on Quiet Care falling, but she also had a PERS at the same time, one of those buttons. She refused to press it. And the real reason why she felt if she kept pressing it, then she would be pushed out of her home, no longer living independently, but made to go to an old people's place. And she did not want to do that. Our findings are that PERS works for some people much of the time, but there's many cases where people will actually not use it, not wear it, not press it, in which case the non-obtrusive unworn system gives you another way of getting at that information.
So can I'm sorry, I know I said I'd wait, but I just want to follow up on one thing that you said, David.
Yeah.
You mentioned that this is a rule-based system, and you talked about 2 hours for the length in the bathroom. Is that set for like a population, or can you also set individual rules for each person? So if this person usually is 10 minutes in the bathroom, for example.
Yeah, typically the way it works is a notion of a rolling average. That if a person goes to the kitchen and opens and closes the refrigerator multiple times within a 10-minute window, that can be used as a meal event. And then there has to be 5 minutes of not using it. There's a different set of rules for determining what we call the footprint of each of these kinds of interactions with objects in the environment that then begin to record the existence of a particular activity event. So nighttime bathroom usage is literally just going into the bathroom. Medication usage is opening and closing the medication container. Meal preparation usage is opening and closing the refrigerator, as well as being in the kitchen, and in some cases it would also open and close a silverware drawer. Okay, so the different rules, there's a set parameters in terms of what is normal pattern for a given person over time. Usually these parameters are set within 10 days, but permanently set within 30 days. And it's a rolling average of activities. So if a person, let's say, is usually up by 7 o'clock in the morning and they're still in bed, let's say, by 9:38, that may be within their rolling average, enough time to make some kind of status change to yellow and then eventually to red. Another person may have much more variance at what time they get up, in which case that variance would not trigger this kind of alert.
Thank you.
What has been the response that you found for people when you're trying to get them to put these systems into their home? Do you find that you have a lot of people that are concerned with privacy issues, or does it take a lot of explaining of things to get them comfortable with wanting to have this system in their house?
That's a great question. Interestingly, privacy issues do not occur frequently among the very ill and frail. It seems like the people that really need this generally are not concerned so much with their privacy. What does work is if you have a trusted visiting nurse that can say to the person, I've been working with you for 6 months, and I think things are going pretty well, but I have some concerns. And I think that this system called Quiet Care could really help me help you better. And based on the relationship of that nurse to the patient, in this case, a home health client, you can get people to say, yes, I want to do this. And generally speaking, that dynamic of having a trusted caregiver, typically a paid caregiver, but could be an informal caregiver, or if you will, even a team of caregivers, sit down with the client and say, we think that you could really use this. It would be very helpful. Based on that level of trust and relationship, you generally can get a very high extent of buy-in.
That's great. Can I follow up on that in terms of any sort of issues you run into with privacy and HIPAA, just in terms of the system? And also, you talked about how it can feed into the medical records, and I was also kind of interested in how that works too. Okay.
Yes. So the privacy concerns of the system are fairly rigid, and to the extent that it goes from testing to actual implementation, you have national standards in terms of the use of this kind of information and who can acquire it and use it, what kind of permissions are involved, what kinds of encryption, and so forth. And these are basically technical issues. In terms of the person themselves deciding they don't like this information, that's happened several times and we've removed it. There was a case of one older gentleman in New York City who literally, based on this information, and boy was he pissed. He wanted this thing out of his apartment immediately. And the fact is, we found out that he was only sleeping about 2 hours a night and was engaged in all kinds of nighttime activity that showed that he was undergoing a number of serious cognitive changes. My take on it is that the information should be the private property of the patient or the client themselves, and they and only they should give information on to who could use it and who can't. Let me move to the other question about the medical record. This information coming from the Quiet Care is interesting and useful, but requires actually a very intimate knowledge of the caregiver with the person they're caring for in order to properly interpret all of these different symbols and numbers. And a way to keep track of that and to help with that was developed for our tests in the Netherlands, where we developed another client that would integrate the quiet care information with the actual responses of the caregivers, in this case, mostly visiting nurses. They would react to a particular piece of information from the quiet care. They would get on their, at the time it was Blackberries, their cell phone, and enter like a little questionnaire as to what the problem is, what they're doing about it. Then it would actually suggest to them, the last time this happened, you did X or Y. And we began to develop a system that actually monitored the behavior of the caregivers, making suggestions on what they might do and not do. But the real interesting finding of this is that it developed a long, very detailed history over time of how the person was doing, what their different problems were, when they stopped eating, when they started eating, all these different things that allowed you to really look at 6 months, a year and a half of a trajectory of not only the quiet care information, but the reaction to it, the interpretation to it, what medical doctors were seeing at different times, and so on and so forth. And this developed into what we call the care record, And it was very, very interesting in the Netherlands. They really liked this.
All right, lots of questions. Lisa?
It sort of plays off of that feeding of information where medical professionals sort of see that too. In countries like the UK where you said there's insurance, like reimbursement for it, is there a chance that insurance over time would want that behavioral data to back up the diagnosis they're paying for?
Okay, very good question. Yeah, reimbursement is the golden fleece, or the holy grail of groups that want to make this a widespread implementation. And I think right now there's something like 17 states that will actually allow for reimbursement of a prescribed behavioral monitoring system. Having said that, the way such a thing will probably get implemented in the United States would be within a closed single-payer system like the Veterans Administration. If the Veterans Administration decides, okay, we're going to use this in one of our large geographic regions and include lots of people in it, it will create the demand, the supply, the demand and supply cycles, to really drive, I think, a wider spread of implementation. In England, in the UK, such a thing comes out of social insurance, not medical insurance. It's taxpayer funded, and it's decided on kind of by what are called councils. So quiet care was used by a number of councils in London and a number of councils in Scotland. And it's kind of like an autonomous decision that they're going to use a piece of their budget to do that. And the Netherlands was funded directly by a kind of insurance that transfers money from their medical insurance, which is all tax paid, into what they might call social insurance for non-medical things. And the way they did it there is they created a new diagnosis, which basically boils down to being old and frail, so that they can have a prescription for different things that are not necessarily medical, and quiet care would fall into that.
I have a question. The first is, so you said that this application should be commercial to be sustainable, and you're saying now a lot of we have a lot of apps and there's a lot of appliances in the home. But when these companies get this information, they don't want to share it with each other. For example, if you have a Samsung fridge, which is smart, and you have a Nike app, which takes care of, check how many calories you use, we cannot sync these two information together and to get a better view of the person's health. So what we should do or answer this?
Yeah, you've hit a major stumbling block. So for example, in the UK, they really thought they would have a unified medical record around an individual's card that would connect all the silos by 2012. They're nowhere near doing it. So even where the law says, yeah, let's share the information, and here's the rules for sharing it among pharmacists, family members, and so on and so forth, and here's actually even the means for making a unified, in this case, medical record, they're having a really hard go of actually making that happen. Companies that are involved in this, I guess the information is sellable to third parties. I'm against the selling of any of this information to third parties. It certainly wouldn't be in my business model if I were involved in this, but I'm concerned in not making money off the information per se, but rather enhancing care. And enhancing care makes some money, but it's not really a huge money maker compared to other things. Let's say we keep somebody out of the hospital. Well, that's really good for the insurance, not having to pay it up. It's not really so good for the hospital because now the hospital doesn't make money. So on a system level, it becomes kind of difficult to see how you would make money off of this information other than improving care. And sometimes improving care, ironically, seems to make less money rather than more money.
And my other question is, you said in the case of quiet care, if there's a fall happen, it's gonna send a notification to the ambulance in the Netherlands and gonna come and save the person. But how about nobody think about the user community? So for example, we are neighbor and I'm saying I'm taking care of you, you're taking care of me. Instead of the notification goes to the government, it goes to me. First I'm going to come and check you. If it was severe, then I call the ambulance. And if it wasn't, I can take care of you. Is it possible to do something such a thing?
Okay, I'm sorry, but your audio is breaking up a little bit. So I'm trying to understand what your question was. Could you summarize it again?
So instead of sending in, when the fall happened, instead of sending a notification to the ambulance, can we send a notification to the neighbor? So for example, we are part of a group and I'm saying, okay, you take
yes.
you and
yes.
Is it a possibility to do? Or?
Of course. In the Netherlands, they decided specifically to do it this way. But that's only when the neighbor and other people, the first thing you would do is call the person on the phone. If that didn't answer, there would be a second person to call right away to check in on the person. If this did not happen, the last thing you would do would be to send the ambulance out. And in the United States, you may have heard of ADT. It's a big monitoring system for home security. That's how they worked as well. They would have a first contact, would be the person, second contact would be a caregiver or a neighbor, and then you would send out somebody from professional services. So yes.
In your implementation section, you discussed how, like, multiple of your examples discussed how quiet care or just these systems affect the staff. Has anyone examined program evaluation or staff like happiness or like over time as the system has been there?
Okay, I think I got most of that. Yeah. So the effects on staff were unintended and unexpected. Okay. One of the very first tests that we did resulted in a visiting nurse being fired the next day for claiming she showed up when she didn't. At a number of sites in Minneapolis that were residential facilities, several staff were fired because they said that they did acts such as a bed check at 4 in the morning for Mrs. B, when in fact they did not do a bed check. So it's a kind of an interesting and complicating situation. Staff generally in residential facilities learn to fear quiet care. And in the visiting nurse situations where it's actually in a person's house, they tended to like quiet care. And having said that, when you have new information, it means new responsibilities, which mean extended liabilities. So simply having information about what goes on in a residential facility behind the closed bedroom doors of somebody means that if you have that information, you better act on it. And I recall an owner, it was a franchise of a residential facility in New Jersey, who happened also to be an attorney, very bright guy, entrepreneurial guy, saying we might as well send this information right into the opposing attorney's inbox, because here is the whole record of what we should have done that we now are liable for that we actually did not do. So when we talk about a disruptive technology, I'm giving you some very good examples of that. That's an excellent question.
So it seems like a recurring theme in the field of gerontechnology that money is a major issue, and that even big and little companies that have the capabilities to make these technologies, despite their benefits, choose not to because it's not making enough income. Is there discussion in the field about how to overcome this?
Well, that's an interesting question. There's not a whole lot of discussion about that. I mean, we've seen about approximately 20 years of a lot of academic activity, engineering labs getting grants to produce technologies, and then leaving it to someone else to kind of translate them and bring them into the real world. And there's been a lot of kind of lab work, but very little translation. And where there has been translation, it's been mostly in the form of these kind of voluntary tests that I argue really don't lead to implementation for a variety of reasons. In the case of QuietCare is kind of interesting and cautionary. QuietCare, I had a little company with my partner called Behavioral Informatics. They licensed the technology to a group called Living Independently Group out of New York. And this attracted nearly $50 million over a 7-year course of investment, and was quite successful in certain ways. But at a certain point, General Electric came in. And when General Electric came in, they proceeded to take over in a way that they often do with these small companies. They say, here's a company, it's not making much money, there might be something here down the road, why don't we get involved with them? And the way they get involved with you is they give you money, and they ask for a seat on the board, and then they offer more money in the form of bridge loans for operating the company. When that happens, the institutional investors join GE and buy up what are called preferred stock, which means that the stock that a founder like I would have becomes worthless. So I lost 680,000 shares, my partner and I, of stock that went to zero value. And GE basically then took the company over, okay? And will sit and wait. They're not gonna put a lot of money into this because they're not gonna get a lot of money out of it. But at some point, when some other company decides, hey, this is how we really make money off of this, GE now has a patent stream. GE now has a finger in the pool of business activity, and is going to say, okay, you guys have been somewhat successful, we're going to partner with you. And that's how the large companies work. That's how they roll. That's what GE and Intel and so on are about. The innovation, in a sense, is going to come from little small groups. They'll be bought up and shelved until there's a way to make real money off of it. We live in a system called capitalism, and the way capitalism works is investment flows to whatever makes the fastest amount of profit in the shortest amount of time. Sure profit. If you make more profit, if General Electric makes more profit in real estate, they invest in that quarter. If they make more profit in QuietCare, they would invest in that. But where they really are, that medical division where they really make profit is not yet QuietCare. And frankly, I don't think behavioral monitoring by itself, uncoupled with care records and other kinds of systems, without an integration into other systems, I don't think it's going to go very far as a standalone. So I've answered your question and a few others, I think.
I was curious as to the user interface and related to the rolling averages you were mentioning. Is there a way that a user could input that they will have some, like a period of aberrations in regard to the rolling average? Say an elderly person breaks their leg, they're not going to leave their bedroom as much, and they might not be making food, which could hit on the system. But is there a way they could say, I am going to not be using these services for a little bit due to, some sort of external cause, so, maybe ignore these functionalities?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Very good point. Let's say somebody simply goes away for the weekend. Boom, everything is thrown off. So there's a double solution to that. And one is, let's say, if they're gone Saturday and Sunday and so on, that information is actually taken away and declared a vacation day from collecting and using the data to, in a sense, reprogram the parameters of the averages. In addition to that, there's a vacation day button that what happens is somebody doesn't tell the social worker that they're going to Atlantic City. It literally happened. And it looks like they're dead on the floor. They're just not there. So eventually you go into their apartment, they're not there. Where are they? We don't know. So the system, if it's operated correctly, will do two things. One is the managing caregiver can simply say on vacation, and it won't collect data for that day. It'll collect it. It won't store it and use it. Or it will actually give you a whole bunch of red alerts that there's no activity whatsoever, and you have to decide and find out whether the person is home or not home. If they're not home, then you want to basically take those days out of the rolling average.
I don't know if you have these in people's homes, have you found that having a pet disrupts the system in regards to if there's in an area or even multiple?
Yeah. Or even multiple, say again?
Or even multiple people living in the space.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Pets are not much of a problem. Multiple people are extremely interesting. And though it's kind of tailored for people living alone, even people that are living alone have multiple people. So what you're looking at for something like meals preparation, it may be the individual, or it may be a care health assistant that comes in on Tuesdays and Thursdays and Saturdays to work in the kitchen and prepare a meal. What you're seeing in multiple person households is a unit of analysis, which is the household activity rather than the individual. And that's an important consideration. And it turns out such information tends to be very useful, even so. The big dog and wild cat phenomenon is relatively minor. The big problem, frankly, with motion detectors it turns out, are heat gradients, like having a radiator or a hot air vent turn on and off can create a flurry of apparent motion that's not really there. So there are a number of kind of interference noise issues that have to be filtered out. Pets are not a big one. Multiple people is a fascinating and interesting thing, and you will see a different kind of rhythm of patterns for a multiple person household rather than a single person household. Great questions.
I noticed your chart I thought was interesting with the green, red, and yellow lights. I was wondering what sort of work you did around developing or coming up with an idea or working with nurses to see what sort of monitoring platform might work best for them.
Sure. Okay, so the traffic light pattern was something that frankly just occurred to me as the most natural way of doing it. In 1993, 1994, this idea had kind of invented itself in a number of different groups. I mentioned, I think, 3 of them on 3 continents in the article, but the same traffic light pattern was developed independently by people in Boston and people in Virginia. What you can't see from the traffic light pattern is when you click on it, you can then drill down and see a lot more information. And there are multiple screens. And these interfaces were actually done with visiting nurses and social workers as still shots to say, hey, do you like this? Does this work? And we would try different things. The style of research that I do in this, as well as other things, is called participatory action research, in which the people you're studying actually work with you as researchers and interpreters of research results. So working with social workers and nurses, we were able to perfect a very simple and intuitive set of interfaces, of which you only see the first screen on that screenshot. And then working with the people in the Netherlands on a much more elaborate, though, mobile phone-based system, where you'd actually be entering information, answering some checkboxes and putting a little text in to what actually became kind of a blog for each person that's being taken care of. That was also an iterative process. There's an article that I have called Ceding Control to the User, the benefits of ceding control to the user, that kind of goes into those issues.
Thank you. I have time for one last question. Well, what are the future plans for Quiet Care? Your involvement?
There are no future plans for Quiet Care that I know of. I'm out of the game entirely.
What would you like to see happen next in that space?
Yeah, sure. I would like to see a good behavioral monitoring system become widely available and widely used. My interests, I should say, I'm a strange person in many ways, but I'm a gerontologist with a technology background. Okay, I'm a gerontologist. My big interest is keeping people in their houses, their homes, for as long as possible. And we can discuss why that's important, another discussion. So I think that something like this is absolutely very useful to help people and their caregivers work as a team with professionals in what I call a care ring, a team that would together look at this information as well as other kinds of information to understand the changing and dynamic status of a person, so they can get the right care at the right time from the right person. I'd love to see that. From a technological point of view, personally, I'll only get involved in something if I have really strong control over the design and development of it. I'm not gonna, in a sense, start at the bottom. So I'm personally out of the technology development game. I've had offers to go back to it.
I bet this has been really insightful for us, because we have heard about the gerontology side, we've heard about the technology side, but really bridging this gap and your practical experiences have been novel and valuable for us. So thank you for your time today.
Well, thanks. I'm glad it's of some use for somebody, and I'm happy to answer questions or to talk more with you, whatever would be useful. Let me point out that I have a couple of other writings that get more deeply into a number of these issues. So what I'm going to do is send along some references and maybe some PDFs. One that will explain more of the technology and exactly how these rules work and how they were developed. Another that will deal with research in, it's my favorite article. It's called Listen to the Chaos, It's Not Just Noise, on conducting essentially experimental research in very haphazard settings, like an old lady's house, okay? There's another one that's actually on investment capital and how that game works. So there's a number of different articles, and maybe what I can do is send some along, and you can people can decide what they're interested and not interested. And if you have more questions for me, you can get back in touch with me. right now, I'm actually doing work in sociological and cultural theory. I'm very busy. I'm just not doing any new technology projects, though I am the faculty advisor for the Amateur Radio Club here at Drexel. So I'm a geek. You know, I'm a total geek, you know, but right now I'm keeping it to a hobby level. But it's been a wonderful experience. I've always wanted to be an inventor, and I got to do that, you know. So my checklist of things I've gotten, it certainly helped me get tenure and promotion. So it's been a very good experience, but right now it's kind of at a dead end. And also there's something called non-compete agreements. So I was essentially paid off with my partner by selling the patents to Intel and GE, but I'm precluded from doing, in a sense, what was my own core work.
Oh, right.
It's called a bargain with the capitalist devil. So I'm not rich, but you know, I have more money for retirement that I wouldn't have had on essentially a school teacher's salary at Drexel, being a sociologist and not an engineer. Now it's like almost like I had a good engineer's salary all the way through. So thank you very much. This has been a pleasure, and I'll be in touch. And if you guys have more questions, you know, I'm happy to participate in any way that might be helpful.
Thank you. I was going to say, you might get some questions from one of the groups who's working on some interfaces with nurses. It might be very helpful to see some of the designs that you've already used.
Sure.
I found useful.
Sure. I'd be happy to help out. And I'm still, you know, I'm going to probably do some more work with the Smart House people, because the original technology was all real cheap Smart House stuff that I hacked. And, you know, it's really kind of a funny story because I'm literally soldering the stuff together and doing the programming. So I got to do everything involved, which is unusual to be able to have an experience like that. I'm very happy it happened that way.
So there is a
I see one
possibility.
last.
Excuse me. There is a possibility we can hands on your interface, so we can see what when you click on a red dot, or it gives you more information.
That's a really good question. And the short answer is I don't think so, because the entire system was based on MySQL database that required ongoing weekly patches online, and is now, I think, deader than dead. So I'm very disappointed not to have an active system, and I'm not allowed into the GE system. They won't give me a password. That's called being stitched out. On the other hand, I think I do have screenshots of how it looks all the way through, if I can find them. They're on an older laptop of mine. So let me look around, and if you guys have questions and stuff, again, I'll make sure that I send my my email and all of that. But I think at least I can show you still shots of what the different things look like. I don't think I can do an active radio button, you know, online thing anymore, which I really feel bad about. I was hoping to keep that going, but you can't keep it live if it's MySQL. It'll just become rotten within a matter of months.
Yeah. Thank you so
Okay?
much.
Okay, sure. Okay.